Go off with some troubling economic news. The latest numbers show the U.S. economy got smaller in the first 3 months of this year, the first time that's happened since the COVID pandemic. Most economists blame President Trump's tariffs for the decline in the GDP. He says it's not his fault. Weijia Jiang is at the White House. Weijia, good morning.
Good morning, Nate. Good morning, everybody. Well, since President Trump announced his aggressive tariff policy, we have seen market volatility and mounting uncertainty. But you're right. He says tariffs have nothing to do with the withering economy. His other message to Americans is to be patient. He promises a boom is on the way.
Start off by saying that's Biden. That's not Trump, because we came in on January, this is the quarterly numbers.
Trump did, but the numbers also show inflation is slowing while consumer spending sped up with a rush to beat anticipated price hikes and supply shortages linked to tariffs. Trump had a solution for that.
Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30.
On Capitol Hill, it was not only Democrats who criticized the president.
This is not Joe Biden's economy, Donald. It is your economy. It is the Trump economy.
So did Republican Senator Rand Paul.
Tariffs are taxes, plain and simple. Tariffs don't punish foreign governments, they punish American families.
But Trump argues his tariff policy is already working. Yesterday, he hosted the CEOs of several companies that have announced new investments in America, including Johnson & Johnson, Eli Lilly, IBM, and NVIDIA.
Without the president's leadership, frankly, manufacturing in the United States wouldn't have accelerated to this pace.
Last night, former Vice President Kamala Harris, who has not ruled out another run for the White House, made her most extensive remarks since leaving office.
Some people are describing what's been happening in recent months as absolute chaos. And it's certainly true of those tariffs. Tariffs that, as I predicted, are clearly inviting a recession.
Well, Senate Republicans narrowly voting down a Democratic resolution Wednesday aimed at blocking Trump's tariffs. Tomorrow, another key number will add to the overall economic picture. That's when the jobs report for April is released.
It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Vincent Brown. Vincent Brown is the Charles Warren Professor of American History and Professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. A native of Southern California, he was educated at UC San Diego, where he received his PhD in history from Duke University, and where he also trained in the theory and craft of film and video making. He has published 2 prize-winning books about the history of slavery, The Reaper's Garden, Death and Power in the World of Atlantic Slavery, and Tacky's Revolt, The Story of an Atlantic Slave War, as well as numerous articles and reviews in scholarly journals. He is also principal investigator and curator for the animated thematic map Slave Revolt in Jamaica, 1760 through 1761, a cartographic narrative, and he has produced, directed, and hosted numerous award-winning television documentaries and programs, including Herskovitz at the Heart of Blackness, which was broadcast nationally on the PBS series Independent Lens, and How Do You Remember the Days of Slavery, a 20-minute documentary following Professor Brown as he travels to Jamaica to speak at the island's 2nd annual Chief Talkie Day in St. Mary Parish.
Pleased to see so many friendly faces in the audience, which is especially comforting during these very challenging times. I feel like we're in the midst of a life-changing transition. And so we'll talk about one aspect of that this afternoon. I'm blessed to join you now during what I think might be the last officially recognized Black History Month. I don't know, maybe you'll keep it going in California. I followed efforts in this state to address the legacies of conquest and slavery through conversations about land claims, reparations, and the expansion of Black and ethnic studies programs. The way we understand processes of transition and experiences of transformation is crucial to that discussion, which will go nowhere, in my view, without considering the global dislocations, migrations, and social movements that comprise the key passages of African diaspora history. Yet knowledge of the subject is politically contested. It must be claimed and defended. We find ourselves in the midst of a long, unceasing struggle to make truth and justice into the American way. As the most populous state in the Union, California is a critical battleground in this fight, where the stakes could not be higher. How do we ensure that Black history is not just remembered, but serves as a blueprint for liberation in the face of mounting challenges?
The thing is, America has given you a false history so that the Caucasians can claim they did everything when they did nothing. They stole everything.
Yet knowledge of the subject is politically contested. It must be claimed and defended. We find ourselves in the midst of a long, unceasing struggle to make truth and justice into the American way.
Yes.
As the most populous state in the Union, California is a critical battleground in this fight, where the stakes could not be higher. How do we ensure that Black history is not just remembered, but serves as a blueprint for liberation in the face of mounting challenges? My colleagues here, who have been under attack from the same forces seeking to silence us at Harvard University, know the price of standing firm as the far-right national government unleashes mounting attacks on higher education. Not long ago, it seemed like universities were leading an effort across a range of institutions to reckon with the most iniquitous aspects of their history. Acknowledging the harmful legacies of colonialism, slavery, and racism, leaders of civil society sought out to make amends. It didn't get very far. In their efforts to account for the legacies of slavery, institutions had reacted to a sudden swerve in public consciousness. The transnational uprisings, inspired by high-profile killings of Black people in the 20-teens, drew renewed attention to persistent racial inequalities in life chances, in policing and the administration of justice, and in the very way societies represented who and what were important. Demonstrations cropped up against the symbols of the colonial and slaveholding past, crisscrossing the Atlantic Ocean, from the Black Lives Matter movement that began in the United States to the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa and the United Kingdom, which inspired people to take down statues of Confederates in the U.S. And in this wave of iconoclasm, Cecil Rhodes, Silent Sam, Robert E. Lee, and Edward Colston could all be surrogates for each other in a transnational story of empire, colonialism, and slavery, a story that demanded retelling with attention to its victims. But as we all know, soon after the troubles of 2020, the political mood shifted decisively. In the U.S., numerous states passed laws restricting the teaching of Black history and the subject of race and racism, beginning with Florida's rejection of an advanced placement course for African American studies by public schools because, officials said, it was contrary to Florida law and lacks educational value. Right-wing activists sought to ban school materials considered to be woke. School officials in several states told teachers to hide their books or to wrap their covers in plain paper to avoid detection by censors. Finding an opportunity in the domestic divisions that intensified in the wake of October 7th, 2023, a growing chorus that included powerful donors blamed student protests on what they called an oppressor-oppressed worldview that associated Israel with the history of colonial racism. Reformers who had offered concessions to those who sought transformative justice now retreated before others who wanted the restoration of old orders, even if that required more policing and punishment to bring people back into line. The backlash has made rapid progress since the 2024 presidential election. Attacks against a changing series of demonized acronyms, BLM, CRT, DEI, are condensed in an executive order issued January 29th that seeks to end what it calls racial indoctrination and discriminatory equity ideology, and to penalize K-12 schools that stray from patriotic education. Asked by Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy if African American history classes would violate the executive orders, the incoming Secretary of Education has said that she is not quite certain. At a time when the executive branch of the national government is violating the rule of law and the Constitution in order to dismantle the civil service in advance of the likely looting of the Treasury, the crisis in education policy may not be the most urgent thing happening to the country and the world. But telling the truth about our history becomes even more important at a time when distortion is a strategy of power. And I've decided just keep doing my job until they force me to stop. So it's all right with you this afternoon. I want to explore the value of Black study and Black history, not just as a record of our past, but as a guide for navigating the present and shaping the future. Asked by Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy if African American history classes would violate the executive orders, the incoming Secretary of Education has said that she is not quite certain. At a time when the executive branch of the national government is violating the rule of law and the Constitution in order to dismantle the civil service in advance of the likely looting of the Treasury, the crisis in education policy may not be the most urgent thing happening to the country and the world. But telling the truth about our history becomes even more important at a time when distortion is a strategy of power. And I've decided just keep doing my job until they force me to stop. So it's all right with you this afternoon. I want to do so by telling a story about Black revolt. The backlash I've described is not only a denial of Black history, this is more importantly, in my view, a refusal to acknowledge Black perspectives on history more generally. It is a denial of our right to critically analyze all of our history from points of view that may be more common to Black people than others. Perspectives that emerge from a history of enslavement, impoverishment, and racial violence, and that question the customary disavowal that these things constitute fundamental features of the American experience. As the historian of education, Jarvis Givens, has said, to deny students the opportunity to critically study Black life and culture is to deny them the opportunity to think outside of the racial myths that are deeply embedded in the American curriculum. Now, we can be outraged by these attempts at censorship, but no one should be surprised. The effort to suppress, distort, and defame Black history has a very long history of its own.